I'm also going to kind of announce the cafe as open. And as we know, this is a place where we come together as friends and colleagues to find some respite, to share some ideas, and then the wisdom is always in the group. So I've got a framework that I'd like to share with you, and I've got a special guest on the show that I've asked to join us. And I'm going to ask her to share her story because it ties in so beautifully with what I'm going to propose that we think about. And then, like we do, we'd like to create some breakout rooms where we can all share what's working for us, what potentially we're struggling with, so we can leave potentially with something that we could maybe try and put into practice, so that we can stay resilient through these very uncertain and different times. So I'm sure most of you have come across this quote that I'm going to share with you. It really remains my favorite. So it's the quote from Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. Would anybody like to share what they feel that space is for them? And does this quote relate to where you are right now in this moment?
I think for me, that space represents kind of all the possibility and power that I really have to choose, to be kind of operating in a self-authoring mind as opposed to a socialized mind, to think about adult theory. I tell myself better stories if I honor that space, and I tell myself significantly worse stories if I don't honor that space.
And how do you honor that space?
Step back, breathe, and just exhale and kind of calmly think about what do I want to create here.
And that ties
unfortunately, that's not majority of the time, but that's the ideal state.
You know, I think that's one of the hardest things in the world to do.
Yeah, especially in emotionally charged situations.
Yeah. And that ties in with actually last week, Sharon and I had the opportunity to work with a cohort, and she shared some work. For the first time, I've met this magnificent human being, Richard Rudd, which some of you may know, who's written several books, including The Art of Contemplation. And Sharon shared this 3-step process that Richard speaks about, which is pause, pivot, and merge. And as I was listening to Sharon, as often happens with me, is I don't always come up with ideas on my own, but I'm very good at creating ideas once I have a spark. And I said to her, do you know what I'd love to share at the Resilience Cafe is my twist on Richard's work, which is pause, pivot, and then practice purpose. And so we'll come back to the pause and the pivot, because that really is what we just spoke about, you know, creating that space so that we're able to show up better, tell better stories, respond rather than react. But starting with the end in mind, I'd like us just to spend a few moments thinking about, well, how do we practice purpose? You know, if you think of Simon Sinek's The Golden Circle, starting with your why, because once we quite clear on a why, I think it becomes so much easier to always find a how. And so on the note of purpose, I'd like to introduce Teresa, who I recently met and was just bowled over by not just her story, but the way that, Teresa, you just vulnerably shared. And I feel like I've met a kindred spirit, even though we've known each other for about a week. So may I invite you just to, I know there's a lot more to your story, but in the interest of time, to give us a quick summary of your story. And then I'd like to ask you a question about purpose. I'll unmute you. Thank you. Or not. Let me try. You want to unmute yourself? There we go.
Yeah.
Great.
Hi everyone. It's great to be here with you today, and thank you for inviting me, Celine. I'm really grateful. So I'm going to try and keep this as succinct as possible, and I do go off on a bit of a tangent sometimes, so please keep me fenced in with the time.
I'll wave my wand.
So yeah, wave your wand. 14 years ago, I was driving home from a and I fell asleep at the wheel. And this resulted in the deaths of 3 of my friends. I was also very severely injured and spent 4 months in hospital, and knew really when it happened that I would go to prison, and wanted to, kind of with every part of my being, for justice for the families, but also for my family, and to kind of really help me and everybody to process what had happened. So I knew I had to get psychologically and emotionally well enough to be able to kind of cope with what prison would bring. And so I sort of focused all my energy on that. But when I got to prison, that really became the catalyst for finding my purpose, because it kind of gave me time to really sit with how I felt, and you know, to try to make sense of what had happened. And I couldn't possibly go back to what I did before, which was I worked in fashion. So I started to volunteer for an organisation called the Samaritans, who had a programme in the prison where people would get called out to women in crisis to offer support. And I'm not really sure how I managed to get through the application process, to be honest, because I was in as much crisis as they were. But somehow I was able to switch that off, and I could really understand what they were going through, because I had really experienced, or was experiencing, what suffering felt like. And I think, you know, with mental health, we if we don't actually have it ourselves, or have had it, experienced it ourselves, or experienced somebody else that has had it, it's very difficult to really truly understand it. So that really was the catalyst for me finding my purpose. And then I knew every day I had to make a choice. And to be honest, still, you know, now I have to make a choice. You know, do I choose to get fitter, or do I choose to get better? And better for me means, how can I help people? I feel like my purpose is to make people happy. So Celine, do you want me to kind of go into a bit more, or should I?
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I know what struck me was 2 things, was how when you came out of prison, that was really when the journey began for you. And it made me resonate with this whole, like, everyone speaking about when lockdown ends, as if that's the ending, but really that may just be the beginning. And there will be this residual, I think, crisis and ongoing journey. So I think keeping open to that. And then through this all, how do you stay true to purpose? And you shared when we had a chat earlier, there were 1 or 2 questions and things that help you to stay true to purpose.
Yeah, so I'll just give a little bit about relating to COVID and kind of what's going to happen afterwards. So it's a natural trauma response. So like I said, kind of I knew that I had to put all my energy in getting kind of through prison, and so that was my end goal. So when I came out of prison, I kind of thought that life would be easier, but actually it wasn't. That was, I would say, probably the hardest time for me, because life kind of went back to the same, but I wasn't the same, and I couldn't really find my place in the world. So what got me through it was my work of helping others to find self-belief. So my top tips to stay in my purpose have been to tune into my heart, and bring my focus back within. And for me, there's 2 kind of really important sides of that, which is acceptance and honesty. And when I say honesty, it's about being brutally honest with yourself of how you're really feeling, and how, you know, if you don't feel good, that's okay as well. And it's just about kind of, you know, feeling those emotions, because what happens is if we don't accept and we're not honest, then those things come up to challenge us further on down the line. So for me, part of resilience is really accepting where you're at, and you know, being honest with yourself also about how you're feeling. So I use this time to really go within and find and remember who you are. Remember who you are before your essence, before you were conditioned really by society, and before you were swept up in the sort of collective waves of what you think you should be, or what other people think you should be. So something that I used a lot in my work when I worked with people with mental health problems is like getting them to connect back to when they were a child, and sort of asking them 3 questions is, you know, what really makes me happy? What am I passionate about? And when do I feel the most alive? And if you ask yourself those questions, you can really come back to finding what your purpose is, and that will really help to sort of steer you in the days that come beyond this. You know, to be realistic, it will be challenging because we're not able to sort of look beyond at the moment, because we don't know, the uncertainty of what life will be like afterwards. So
Yeah.
That's the best advice that I can give, is really sort of coming back into your heart and sitting and, recognizing when maybe you're not in alignment, because when we're not in alignment, that's when we feel, maybe we feel overwhelmed, or we feel very resistant, or we feel angry, or we feel upset. And that's because we are, we're feeling emotions, but we're also not in alignment with how we truly feel and what our true, it's about what your core values are really. And if you can connect into those.
Teresa, can you just, sorry, could you repeat the 3 questions? You said what, happy, passion, and it was...
And yeah, when do you feel the most alive? What am I passionate about? And what makes me happy?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. And we share a common question. I also have 3 questions that navigate and help me make choices and stick to my purpose. And one of them is, does it make me feel more alive? And then the others are, is it easy in terms of, is there a lack of resistance? And does it increase my ability to love myself and the world? And those questions help me. And I think what struck me is your phrase about coming back to the heart and coming back to stillness, really. And that's where I think, Sharon, you said this isn't easy. And Richard Rudd emphasized that coming to this place of pause is so important, but it probably is the hardest thing to do. And I was thinking about how pauses are so important. In music, we don't have music without the pauses. I enjoy dancing. I'm a salsa dancer. And in dance, you have to pause before you can move to the next move. And that also includes the components, I guess, of pivoting. And one of the analogies that Richard shared in one of his videos on YouTube around pausing is how a pause can be very brief. It can be a breath, or it can be longer. It can be an hour of sitting in stillness, I guess. And what it does, no matter how short or how long a pause is it allows the muddiness in our heads and our thoughts to clear. And that allows us to potentially feel with a bigger heart and a clearer mind. And then after the pause, you can then know what you're feeling and then potentially make a decision to, say, pivot and do something different. And what you pivot, hopefully, is aligned with your purpose. So at the moment, I'm trying to stay playful. So when I catch myself feeling tight or constrained or tense, I ask, what can I do in this moment to bring in a sense of playfulness or aliveness? But I'd like to stop here and perhaps create some breakout rooms where we can share how are we managing with pausing, pivoting, and practicing our purpose. Do you have an idea of what your purpose is? Jim may be able to help with that next week if you don't. I'm not sure exactly what you're going to cover, but we are going to speak about legacy. And I think let's also start with the beginning. How and where do you find pauses in your day to help you come back to your heart and yourself? So, just
to add one thought there, Celine. I mean, the whole thing, if I just had to kind of re-summarize this in my own way to make sense for it for myself. So pause for me is very linked to breath, that stopping to breathe and notice. That meta-awareness we spoke about in our first workshop, meta-awareness means stepping away from yourself and seeing yourself. Mm. And if we can get a habit, I mean, Richard suggests that you put these, little alarms on your phones, at least 3 pauses, if you don't do it naturally, to get yourself into learning how to pause. That enables you to just notice what's going on in the moment. What am I feeling? What's happening in my body? What's happening in this room? What's happening in this board meeting right now? In our work in leadership, so many leaders have said to us, I just got to talk louder than the next person, and it just becomes very reactive because it's just who's got the loudest voice, who's banging the desk, who's... And very seldom do people actually become intuitive and say what's really going on here and what's really needed here. And I think that's what pausing actually enables us to notice what's going on in the moment and then to respond rather than react in the old patterns. And for me, the third P would be that response. Is it aligned to who I really am? You know, I for many years, and some of my friends will know, we started a company called the Center of Light, Love and Laughter. And I think my core purpose is around light, love and laughter. And that's the question I often ask myself, you know, is what I'm doing in this response right now symbolic of light or love or laughter right now? So that's how I kind of make sense of the 3 Ps for myself.
Lovely. Lovely. Thank you. Well, let's do 10 minutes in a breakout room, and then we'll come back and reconvene. She says without actually doing the maths of the breakout. I'm going to do more rooms with the less people. Actually, yeah. I'm going to do that. Yeah. So please accept. You'll see a notification saying join the breakout room. And I'll let you know when there's a minute left.
Celine, I'm going to have to go because I've got my call at 1:30.
Thank you, Teresa.
So it was great to meet you all. Enjoy the session.
Thank you, Teresa. I'll be in touch. Okay.
Great. Thanks, Celine. Bye.
Hi, Steph. Are you going to join a room or stay here? Do you know how to join a room?
Unmute. Sorry, my invitation was delayed.
Okay.
Sorry, Brian. I think we got zoomed out and now you're on mute. I'm sorry.
You're on mute, Celine.
Yeah, Davide was also in the middle of a story and he was...
So rude, so rude.
I was just apologizing to Davide because you were forced into a pause because I forgot about you all on your own in a breakout room.
I was in a room by myself and I thought, you know, Italians go in a room by themselves here, you know, something like that. But, you know.
And he was so patient. Thank you so much.
So I had some time to think. You know. It was good.
See, life will spontaneously give us opportunities.
So he was really in a pause.
So, I mean, a lot came out of the room that I was in. Would anybody like to share if you specifically had a aha moment from hearing somebody else share anything around pausing or practicing their purpose?
Janine, you're on mute.
I think we had an amazing conversation that linked around pause. We talked about new rhythms that are forming, and the pause being the opportunity to notice those rhythms. And to Sharon's point was whether you wanted to take those on board and almost dance with them or not. And that some of this is about developing new muscle memory. You know, we very much were talking about how this time has provided time to pause, to do things differently, humanity kind of coming back in, a sense of community kind of coming back in, and yet there is so much talk about when we go back to normal and the push for what normality is. And there was a lovely phrase used in the story that was shared about having coming out from prison, everyone expected to be the same, and yet the comment was, and I wasn't. How it is we use the new rhythms, the new muscle memory to keep hold of new things that are helping us and growing us going forward. So I hope I did that justice for the 2 people.
Yeah, lovely.
There.
Makes me think of a client shared with me this morning how it is life as usual, because a lot of people are saying it's not usual, it's abnormal, when we will go back to normal, that potentially was normal, but life actually is usual. It's the environment that's unusual, because pretty much we're still waking up, we're hopefully still doing our own personal hygiene, we're eating, we're exercising, we're doing what we're meant to do. That's normal. And it's the environment that's not. And that's where we have the choice, like you said, to dance with it. You know, we could turn every little corner into a tango move, essentially. Anybody else have an insight? Because what came out of our group was this desire to actually change purpose based on what's happening in the environment. So having known what life's purpose was before, and now actually being okay with not knowing and being in that space. And that ties in, Sharon, with the story about Stripe last week. You know, once you're in the cocoon, there's a process, and there's the book, the flowers. And it's not about the destination, but it is about the journey. And yeah, I know Richard Rudd shared his take or his analogy of pause, pivot, and merge as the seed, the flower, and then the fruit. And the fruit takes time. So I just found this image, which I thought was quite lovely. And the quote that the fruit doesn't come up straight away. It takes time, and it takes some cultivation. So I guess the question is, you know, how can you cultivate and harvest the pauses so that you can potentially pivot and do the dance that you want to your choreography, and then perhaps cultivate these fruits over time. For me, the fruit is playfulness. I don't know if anybody else has a different fruit that you'd like to potentially bear now or in the future.
Now, for me, one of the fruit is as what I shared, and Sharon might recall, when we wrote that book, Diamonds in the Dust. And that is also pausing. You know, the diamonds does not always lie on the surface. You must sometimes wait until the dust flies, and you must also have a magnifying glass to find these diamonds. They are there. But it is a mindset of hope that something good is going to come from that. And that, for me, hope is a skill. It's a life skill that will enable you to respond different, to turn your, as I said it, your stumbling stone into a stepping stone.
Yeah, I love the way that you always say that love is not an outcome. You know, it's not what you hope for, it's that you hope.
Yeah.
The capacity to hope and to live with hope rather than the outcome of hope.
Yeah. And that's also the difference between a vision-led person or a purpose-driven person. Vision always tries to define the outcome. This is where I'm going, you know. Purpose always finds an expression. It's like water. You can put it in any container, you know. It is always there.
I think between us we can solve the world's problems.
Maybe that can be the, is it vision or purpose for the Resilience Cafe?
I think for me, this all hits the notion of resilience straight on the head. And there's so much rich ground we've covered in the last 30 minutes. But for me, I'm doing this leadership circle profile training this week. And so much of it comes down to that little tiny choice we make in that nanosecond. That's the reactive monkey mind versus proactive participatory mind. So thank you for doing this. It's perfect.
Cool. And perhaps as because this doesn't need to be complex choreography steps. And it really, to me, there's nothing more simple than the breath, because it's all we ultimately have. And I was sharing in the breakout room how preparing some of this content made me remember how between the inhale and the exhale, so if you take a breath in now, if I invite you to take a breath, before you can exhale, you have to pause. And then exhale. And then before you inhale, you need to pause. And it's been a long time since I've focused on the pauses. So what I'm taking from this today is I'm going to practice focusing on the pauses between my breaths rather than the breaths themselves. That feels more like a being than a doing space. Yeah. And that's for me is like, I can't think of getting it even simpler than that.
And that's the same thing as you said, Celine, of what makes a beautiful dance and what makes beautiful music as well, is the
Yeah.
pauses.
Yeah.
Imagine if it was just continuous movement without pauses, you know.
Just be a big racket. Yeah.
Phil, you're on a mute.
I'll unmute you, Phil.
Thank you.
There we go.
The other thing I shared in our group was noticing how sometimes when I miss the pause, when I miss the choice point between reaction and blame, or reaction and responsibility, and to be kind to myself, even if the noticing of my reactivity is later that day, or even the next day, or even the next week. If I can notice my reaction even a week afterwards and start to be kind to myself, but perhaps use it as an opportunity to increase my ability to notice closer to the reaction, and then getting back to catching myself at the point of reaction. I think there's times when, if there's a lot of reactivity happening, if there's a lot of change happening, if I'm in a situation where I feel more out of control, I can beat myself up for not spotting my reactivity quickly enough. And I think there's an opportunity to be gentle and sometimes notice a day later, often when I'm meditating in the morning, what will come up for me is things that I handled well the day before, and sometimes things I didn't handle as well as I'd have liked to have done. So there's the choice point. And the choice point sometimes comes later than in the moment of recognition.
And the forgiveness with compassion.
Yeah.
What that is. Yeah. Phil, I think that's a beautiful note to end off on. But this is just the beginning, because we're on the journey, right? So the journey continues, same time next week. And Jim, you are hosting us.
Yep.
Anything you want to say as a teaser so that we all come back with friends?
So we're gonna dive into it and help you look at your purpose and build on very much what was discussed today in terms of choice and really owning your why.
Owning your why. I'm there like a bear.
Perfect. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you.
I think,
Thank you.
Jim,
Thanks, everyone.
looking forward, some people's why is still like a black cat in a dark room. You hear it now, but you've never seen it.
Perfect. I like that, Fritz. That's beautiful.
Fritz, I love the symbolism. At the moment, I'm trying to find pictures for everything. So, yeah, that's lovely. Lovely. Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Davide, I will not leave you in a room alone again, I promise.
Please thank Teresa for sharing her story, because I know she disappeared.
Yes, she had to leave, and what a remarkable woman.
Yeah.
Extraordinary.
Extraordinary.
Very, thank you.
That's now turning a stumbling stone into a stepping stone, eh?
Yeah, I'm sure she'll join us next week. She said she'd like to. So
Cool.
So
Thanks, Lee.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Any of you'd like to invite your friends, please do for next time. We'd love to see them.
Thank you.
Will the recording be available of the call?
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Super.
Okay.
Thank you for that reminder.
guys.
I'll stop recording.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.